The stories about his job are some of our favorites here in the Florida Today studio, and he's back in again today to talk conservation, renovation, animals, and more. Welcome to Florida Today's Eye on Brevard. I'm Rob Landers.
And I'm Isadora Rangel. This week, I got a chance to talk with Brevard Zoo's Executive Director, Keith Winsten, about changes to the Space Coast tourism hotspot, the zoo's drive to help save the Indian River Lagoon, and what happens to the animals when storms like Hurricane Irma hit. Watch. Keith, thank you so much for being here on the show today.
Well, thanks for having me.
So let's start with the lagoon. You're very involved in efforts to restore the lagoon. And you wrote maybe a few months ago that the 20 million gallons of sewage that were spilled into the lagoon, that really doesn't affect the estuary as people think. Can you explain that reasoning?
Well, I think that the 20 million gallons of sewage that was dumped in the lagoon was disgusting. Let's start with that. Absolutely disgusting. Nobody wants to have sewage around. It has some real human health pieces to it. The thing that we forget is that we've been dumping literally stuff like that, I was going to use a stronger word, in the lagoon for 50 years. And so this legacy load at the bottom of the muck that we have is essentially that stuff dumped in the lagoon for 50 years. It would kill some of the bacteria, that's why it's a health issue now. So the legacy load is huge, and people forget how big the lagoon is. So we need to fix it because it's horrible and it needs to be taken care of. But compared to all the other issues facing the lagoon in terms of the biodiversity lagoon, it's not the pressing issue. It's like 40 hoses running for a month, and it is disgusting, but we forget, and people tend to react to immediate things. And my worry always is we got to play the long game with the lagoon. We've got to actually look at the plan that's going to remove the muck, stop sewer as well as septic, as well as other things going in. And I always worry that we'll get easily distracted and pull off our plan and do this short-term thinking that really won't result in fixing it.
So I think in one of your columns you tackled utility fees, and the money for sewage improvements should come from the utility fees. Can you explain that?
Sure.
And that's quite an unpopular position in Brevard County, where people really don't like paying more fees and taxes.
Well, I mean, my focus on all of this is we should be adults here. You know, I always teach my kids, if I make a mistake, I admit it and I try to fix it. And you know, for 50 years we've made mistakes with the lagoon. The people of Brevard County stepped up amazingly when they passed the Save Our Lagoon tax in 2016. And previously they'd actually stepped up and raised some of the sewer fees. And those are fees, they're not taxes, so the amount you pay is on the amount you use. That is the funding mechanism to use to fix your sewer. And every municipality and state, everybody uses that mechanism. So if we need more money to fix sewer system, then those fees should go up. That's how you pay the bills, you cover the cost. We start to divert money from somewhere else, it's A, never going to be enough, and B, you're just going to strangle something else. And that's why I think sewer is one of those things that we should primarily do with the sewer treatment thesis. There is money in the lagoon plan to convert some septic to sewer and to improve septic, because those are things that aren't picked up.
Money from the half-cent sales tax.
Correct. And so I just get worried when we rob Peter to pay Paul instead of saying, hey, if we all have to pay a fee, and it's a fee, again, it's not a tax, to fix it, then we should do that. And let's actually deal with the problem, get ahead of it, not just knee-jerk to one thing, and think about this long-term and strategically.
Mm-hmm. And one of the solutions to the issue was proposed by Representative Randy Fine. He filed a bill that the House passed. We don't know where it stands in the Senate right now. But basically, it expands the uses of the tourism development tax, which is levied on hotels and vacation rentals. The zoo benefits from the proceeds, but he wants to expand the uses of that money to cover sewage infrastructure, road infrastructure, as long as it benefits tourism. Your views on that approach to the issue?
Again, I go back to what I just said before. Let's dedicate funds that actually carry things. I mean, in my mind, I look at the lagoon like a fire station, right? We pay for fire stations every year because we're always going to have fires. We need those long-term solutions. You don't say, hey, we didn't have a lot of fires last year, let's get rid of the fire station. So simply diverting a small patch of money that's supposed to drive tourism, and which is done extremely well in Brevard County, it's not my favorite solution. I'd rather deal with it directly with it and fix it, fix the sewer problem with funds dedicated for that. And we have a funding mechanism in place to use it. It's just I find people are scared to ever say we need to be responsible and pay the price, but we do.
And let's talk about the sales tax that was passed in 2016. What have you seen so far being done, and where is that going to lead us in the future?
Well, the interesting thing is, last year is actually year zero. We're in year one now. So far, I've been really pleased with what I'm seeing. There's a citizen oversight committee, and they've been doing their job. They've been having a conversation, happens, I remember how often it happens, at least once a month, and it's actually, you can watch it on TV, and they're really engaged in this conversation on how to use those funds. The plan lays it out in real detail how to do it. They're looking for proposals that meet those benchmarks. So in their first year, which was the year zero year, they actually dispersed quite a bit of money to start the projects coming along. The good news is we expected to raise about $320 million over 10 years, but the Brevard economy is doing well. It's closer to $400 million. So some of the things that were left out, for example, shoreline restoration work in the lagoon only was going to be done with things in the water. Now there's money to add plants and things like that potentially with it. So I think it's off to a really good start. I think we have to be vigilant. The other thing is, I can tell you right now, this is a marathon. And so what's going to happen is we're going to have some real bumps along the road. The projects they're starting to do now aren't going to have impact for 5 or 6 years. So if you look at the lagoon right now, there's a terrible brown tide, and it does not look good. And we will probably have some fish kills this spring. And I know people are going to run around and say, what happened to all that money? And the answer is, we're actually year 1 right now. Ask me that question in 5 years, 7 years, and 10 years. Then we'll know how we're making progress.
And what are some of the projects that would prevent brown tides and algae blooms that we have seen in the past?
Well, there's different sort of nutrient sources lead to those. I mean, the core of the Save the Lagoon plan is removing that legacy load muck. About $200 million of the original $305 million was for that. But what I liked about the plan is it recognizes it's an and problem. You have to do this and that. You have to remove the stuff that's in there, and you have to stop new stuff from coming in. So the heart of it is removing all the muck. Then it's addressing some very targeted septic issues and some targeted stormwater issues and some shoreline restoration work to bring the ecosystems back. That's about all those things are a third, and the muck is 2/3. So you're starting to see projects come in, construction projects, muck removals happening in a major way, or is upgrading to do that right now. And then the actual municipalities, what I liked about the town is it said if you can come in and propose a project for the same cost, would remove as much or more nitrogen, we'll substitute that project. So individual municipalities in the counties, they basically have been proposing projects, and the committee has been reviewing them, and if they're approved, they go to the county commission for final approval. So I like that local flexibility as long as it's going to have the same impact or greater.
Mm-hmm. And one of the interesting things that the zoo has been doing is it's becoming more and more sustainable. Last year, I believe in November, you had your first fundraiser that was 100% waste-free, meaning no garbage was produced. Can you explain what it took to put that fundraiser together?
Sure. So, the thing about Brevard County that I love is we are this community that does care and feels motivated to fix ourselves. And we're the only county in the lagoon that's passed a sales tax and actually taken on. I hear people from other counties all the time jealous of us. We're seeing the same thing now with some sustainability issues. There are sustainability councils popping up. And there's lots of things involved in sustainability. Water's part of it, energy's part of it. But I think the thing that's often top of mind is solid waste. And the zoo a couple years ago had this amazing exhibit called Washed Ashore that just were these incredible installations of animal art made of all the trash that washes up on our beaches. And I mean, even the fishes in the deepest part of the ocean now, in the very deepest part of the ocean, they're finding that their gut is full of plastic micro pellets. So we're starting to get aware of just how much plastic we use and how can we reduce that. And so our Jazoo event last November, we actually partnered with all these restaurants that come, 50+ restaurants, and a composter, so that everything we used, except for the glass bottles and the metal that the liquor came in, everything else was a special compostable plastic. It
even
looked like
the
plastic.
Forks and knives and wine.
Right, they're not even plastic, they just look like it, right? They were made out of sugar cane, they all compostable, right? So it could go in a single stream. We set up 60 barrels around the zoo, so all of your food waste, all your straws, all your plates, all your glasses, all your forks, all your knives, single stream. Now here's the problem. If you get any plastic in there, it messes up the whole composting process. Because this stuff is composted, sold to farmers who put it on their fields. And so we had to work with all of these. And it's hard to work with that many restaurants, and we had one or two who we couldn't contact with. And here's my favorite part of it. When they showed up that night, one restaurant showed up that night, and they had put all of their wonderful desserts in these little plastic cups. And we explained to them what was going on, right? And the woman posted her husband, who was a huge guy, at her table and made sure after everyone sampled the dessert, he took the plastic cup back and personally disposed of it. And the reason I tell that story is people really want to change this behavior. They don't want to have their plastic straws filling up the guts of sea turtles. So we've seen this enormous sort of interest in this. So we did Yazoo, we're doing Safari Under the Stars, which is at the end of April. It's also going to be a waste-free event. It is much more expensive for us. You know, it costs in the tens of thousands of dollars of extra expense, but we're trying to model for the community that it's important. And we've gotten a lot of credit for this, which is wonderful, but the bottom line is there's so many initiatives out there right now. And it's in the restaurant's interest. I'm a great believer of using market forces. So if you have a restaurant now that doesn't have to add a straw every time because people say I don't need a straw, or if you're like the crazy zoo people, we bring our own reusable straws, it saves them money.
So you bring your own reusable straws everywhere you go?
We have these sustainability kits that we actually sold at the holidays that have reusable chopsticks, reusable straw, reusable cup, and if you have some food left over, it's got your own doggy bag, so you don't have to take a foam clamshell that's going to end up in some turtle as well. So all of it's reusable. All of it saves the restaurant.
Can you still buy that at the zoo?
Yeah, we're making more of them right now. It's part of our Win of the Wilds program, and people love it. And just keep it in your car. And of course, you have to wash it afterwards. Yeah, it's fun.
And I think last time I was there, I think I bought a water bottle, but you said that you guys were doing away with it. What are the efforts in place to become more sustainable on a day-to-day basis?
So that's one of, so in terms of the zoo, as I mentioned, there's really 8 realms you can look at with sustainability. And we're looking at 4 or 5 of them in a major way, right? So for example, I'll talk about a project later that'll fix one of our exhibits. The water bottle one's a huge dilemma for us. So we're now replacing all of our water fountains with water fountains and bottle fillers. And eventually we'll get to the point, probably next year, where we'll stop selling bottled water at the zoo. But we have contracts in place that include bottled water sales, so we have to wait for those contracts to finish. And it will cost us a tremendous amount of money in bottled water. What we're going to say to people instead is bring your reusable cup, or we'll sell you one at a reasonable rate, and you can fill it up with water yourself. You know, the standards, the irony is the standards of the water coming out of our tap are higher than the standards that are out there for bottled water. So it's a safer, better bet if you're worried about safety issues. Yeah.
Are there other zoos doing this, and how did you come up with this?
Yeah, you know, I'd love to tell you that we're inventing this, but we're not. We're following the pack. Detroit Zoo is all water bottle free. Quite a few zoos have led the charge. You know, you go to the Northwest, much more sustainable culture there. So we pale in comparison to them and some of the things they've done, but we also think we're probably a more important voice in this community. And we also do it here. We prefer if we can do it without regulation, if we can do it and let the market forces do it and just get people on board, that's a better way to go. So we're trying to enroll people in what are the actions you can take to lessen your footprint. We've added solar at the zoo. I mean, a lot of little steps, you know, and that's what we're saying is make the step when you can.
And how long have you been in the zoo business?
I'm pushing 30 years in the zoo business
30 years.
now,
I imagine it's changed quite a bit. I know in my lifetime, the way people see zoos has changed. Some people think that zoos shouldn't exist because you're confining animals. But I understand Brevard has done a lot to, you know, keep up with those changes and make zoos a better place for animals. Can you talk about that?
Sure. I mean, I think when you look at the changes, and every zoo is very individual and unique to their community. I mean, the two changes, I think, is that one is we're really conservation-focused institutions. And in our case, we do a lot of that conservation work here in Brevard County. We talked about the lagoon. This next year, if approved, we hope to actually restore oyster reefs on almost 1.5 miles of shoreline, and actually bring in outside third-party validators to make sure it's working and doing what it's supposed to do. That focus you wouldn't have seen a long time ago, the focus on conservation. The other focus is, you know, we have to lead with animal wellness. If the consumer, if the visitor, if people in the community don't believe that we do a good job caring for our animals, why should you listen to us about those conservation issues? So our focus at the zoo starts with animal wellness. We define animal wellness and how we care for our animals. We also are focused on animal welfare, what we do for animals outside our gates. For example, the Sea Turtle Healing Center that we run, the work we do with manatees and lots of other species. But it starts every day looking at the needs of our animals and saying, are we doing right by these animals? Are these animals living, I would say, authentic lives, the kind of lives they would live in the wild, except they get better medical care, they're not going to get eaten by predators, they never starve to death, really an optimal life if possible.
And I think last time I was there, you mentioned that there's more being done to allow the animals to roam more freely within the zoo. Can you explain that?
Well, there's a couple things you do. Again, quality of life is a whole bunch of different factors. So for example, I tell the story of the macaws. If you came to the zoo 10 years ago, we would have 2 macaws or 1 macaw on a short little length of wood without many options. And we started forming a macaw team because we were worried that our macaws were not doing what they do in the wild under our care. So we started by looking at the time budgets of our macaws. How do they spend their day versus how animals in the wild spend their day? We have that data. We know what percent of time a blue and gold macaw spends in the wild, feeding, preening, et cetera. And we ended up changing conditions until our animals were doing what they do in the wild. So now we have these amazing perches that go on and on and on. They have shade structures, they have water structures, they have clay licks. The animals have lots of choices. We let our macaws pick who they'd like to hang out with. We went through a whole series of experiments. Turned out they really want to stay with the same species, but we wanted to make sure that's who they wanted to be. We rotate them through different perches at the zoo at times, so their lives are interesting. And then we're working, a lot of the macaws we get are people's pets. But for those who still have the ability to fly, so many have grown up in a situation where their muscles are essentially atrophied. Yeah. Our next big exhibit, we really want to offer some flying opportunities for those macaws, and we have some macaws now flying at the zoo. So we'll give them that full range of options.
And during the hurricane, can you talk a little bit about how did you house the animals? I know it requires a lot of work in strategizing to do that.
Right. I mean, we have really three situations. The best situation is almost all of our exhibits have these almost concrete bunkers, I call them. They're night houses, which are made with masonry block and poured concrete roofs. And the best thing is to just basically shelter in place. So our jaguars go into a bunker that you and I would be very safe in. That's the optimal situation. A lot of other animals, we let them shelter in place because they can just find a safe space in their exhibit. And for those who don't, we put them into carriers and we move them into our animal hospital or some other place. That's the least best choice because of the stress of moving the animals. And you have to always make that choice. What's going to be the stress versus Hurricane Irma, we actually thought we had come through completely unscathed. And then a day or two later, we lost a few animals. We lost a cockatiel that we found drowned, which was bedraggled. Now the rest of the cockatiels had sheltered in place and done very well. And then the thing that really, really hurt us was our center pond had so much debris in it, we had a fish kill, and we lost our koi. And so it's a learning piece that we will not let that happen again. I mean, either we'll take the koi out or we'll put aeration in, we'll do something. But a lot of people lost fish, and we thought we were in the clear when this happened. So.
And what is the value of zoos today, and how has it changed from when you started 30 years ago?
Well, the value is a couple things. I still think our top value is what we do for the community in terms of connecting with many things, but I'm gonna bear down a little bit there. We're an important focal point in this community. There isn't really a public space. There's no public market, so to speak, in Brevard County. We serve that role a little bit. In terms of the conservation piece, we've gone into those pieces, but I think the education piece is really interesting. We really see two roles within our education piece that are critical, that are very different than 50 years ago. The first is connecting everybody to nature. I recently heard a stat that the average child spends 4 hours a week outside today in this country. And that's regardless of socioeconomic level, and 40 to 50 hours a week on a screen.
Wow.
Think about that. When I was a kid, it was exactly the opposite. We had access to TV, but our parents, limited it. There wasn't many channels, and we were outside 40 to 50 hours a week. So we're trying to connect everybody with nature. This past year, we built something called the Exceptional Nature Space, which is really for children with a variety of challenges, disabilities, to have access outside. So we're trying to connect everybody in this community, give them options to spend time outside. And the other thing I think that's different today than 10 or 20 years ago is I think we've lost sight as a community what science is and how science drives the decisions we make, which is pretty ironic on the Space Coast as a hub of science. I mean, we trust science, we hope to put up our rockets, but we don't trust science on the lagoon, on climate change. So a lot of what we want to talk about right now with kids is the process of science. So for example, right now we have a fabulous dinosaur exhibit, and why people love it is littered literally with all these real dinosaur fossils that we've actually collected on expeditions to the Northwest. And we asked the question, what's the evidence? How did we learn about this? How do we know what color a dinosaur is? How do we know they had feathers? How do we know if they ate? And the answer is we only know what the evidence shows us. So for most dinosaurs, we don't know the colors unless they were feathered, because in the crystalline structure of the feather, we can look at some of the colors. So we're trying to have a group of families and kids grow up as smart consumers of science, understand the process, understand it's evidence-based, understand there are different theories that then coalesce. So I think those two things are really different, connecting kids to nature. We didn't have to do that 50 years ago, and making sure they understand the process of science.
And I think the beauty of the Brevard Zoo is that it was such a community effort to put it together, and everyone came together, including Florida Today and other organizations. How is it different than other zoos that you have worked at, the bigger zoos like in New York, Chicago? And
well, it's so Brevard, right? So I did a survey recently. I'm part of an association called the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. We're about 230 institutions, and I'd like to think we're the best and the brightest. We're about at 10% of all the people who display animals in this country belong to our associations, all the big zoos and aquariums that you know. I did a survey of my colleagues, of the directors, and said, how many of you are what I call an independent zoo? Private, not-for-profit, not receiving recurring operating support. We do get bed tax for capital, you talked about that, to build new things, but we don't get any recurring governmental support for our operations. We earn that, or the community gives it to us. I found across this country, in our association of 230 institutions, about 10 zoos and 5 aquariums that use our model. Everybody else is either getting public operating dollars, or they're for-profit, like a Disney, or one of the other aquariums, like a Ripley's. So we're pretty unique, very unique in that the community built us, and very unique that we can survive without these public dollars, and that's because we're in a wonderful tourism community. So.
And let's talk about what's new at the zoo. Last year, you created new things. We have Lands of Change, which is an Australia exhibit with a walk-through kangaroo exhibit, and I think that's fascinating. Can you talk about that? How you made that happen in the first place?
Well, what's interesting is, the zoo is approaching 25 years old. We'll be 25 years old next year, and part of our operating model is we want to be better, not bigger. And so we're replacing the older parts of the zoo, and we're now an average length of stay, people reporting, of 4 hours, which is longer than most major aquariums or zoos. So we don't actually want people to stay that much longer, but what we want is a better quality experience. So we've been going around replacing our older loops with newer ones. Our Australia loop was ready to be replaced. We had challenges on flow, and we're very conscious of animal safety, and some of our wire was rusty. So we redid the best parts of that, which was our aviaries. We added Komodo dragons. We added a little amphitheater. And we gave you a walk-through kangaroo yard. And I would tell you before then, I didn't feel great about our kangaroo setup. The animals were doing okay, but I felt they weren't thriving. Now they're thriving, and because a few of them are so comfortable around people, like we have to post volunteers in there to make sure you don't trip on the kangaroos. Now here's the interesting dilemma. The kangaroos literally fall asleep in the paths. And how do we teach people not to touch them? Because if you start touching the kangaroos, then they're not going to be around people anymore because they don't like to be touched, and they're going to shift their behavior. So we have some signs coming out that says, if you love to get close to us, please leave us alone. You could step over us, literally, because we're in the path, but don't touch the kangaroos. They don't like it.
Is that your most popular exhibit today?
Giraffes continue to be exceptionally popular. The Lori aviaries are, but when you have a couple of kangaroos sleeping in the path, that is right up there.
Okay. And what else is new at the zoo?
Well, a couple things. Dinosaurs is here through the end of April. It is terrific. Again, we have these jacketed material, which means dinosaur bones we collect in the fields, wrapped in plaster. We're opening them every week, and so that's a limited time piece. You want to come see it. It's not just for kids. It is really cool.
And when does it end?
It ends the end of April.
Okay.
End of April also is when we have Safari Under the Stars, which is our big gala. And we started 3 years ago doing something I think rather exceptional, and that is we bring in a sort of a celebrity guest. 2 years ago it was Temple Grandin. Last year it was Bindi Irwin. And this year it's Jeff Corwin. So if you're a Jeff Corwin fan, he's been a super popular TV animal guy for years, that Saturday morning you can come and spend a morning with him at the zoo. You don't have to go to the gala that night. Those tickets will go on sale later this week. And it's a $50 ticket, which is not inexpensive, but that money goes to our conservation programs. And people have loved these opportunities to be with some of their heroes at the zoo.
Yeah.
So that's coming up at the end of April, last Saturday of April.
And how many visitors do you get on an annual basis? And is it your goal to increase the number of visitors?
Yeah, our goal is always to increase the number of visitors. We'd love to spread it out in a bit less busy time of year. The wonderful thing about the zoo is the zoo itself can hold thousands and thousands of people comfortably. Our parking lot cannot. So people get frustrated occasionally. They'll come on a peak vacation day, and the parking lot is really busy. I will tell you, once you're in the zoo, and like the longest ticket lines we get is 15 minutes, which I think versus the theme park is nothing. Once you're in the zoo, it is never crowded. That's just not a problem in the zoo itself. We had a record year last year between the zoo and Treetop Trek and Boo at the Zoo. We had over 467,000 people. And that's important for us. If we don't grow, that is what pays the bills. All these programs we do, the Sea Turtle Healing Center, the sustainability work, the work with the lagoon, the work with education, working with children on the spectrum, that's all paid for by people coming to the zoo. So when you come to the zoo and you buy a soda, you go to the gift shop, you feed a giraffe, that's going right back into the program. That's why we're not for profit. So.
Well, that's awesome. And to end it here, you did a column a few months ago about what happened to the alligators at the zoo, and I know you get a lot of questions about it. In 2004, I believe there were 15 alligators. What has changed and what have been the reasons for that?
Well, that's a perfect example of sort of going into everything, wrapping up everything we do. Two ways you can keep the alligators. I've been in the zoo business for a long time, right? And so, we do have a deep understanding of a lot of things we do. Two ways you can keep crocodilians, right? One is you can keep them at high density and they don't set up territories. Or if you keep them more what they do in the wild, they'll set up territories at times during the breeding season. When I started 15 gators, there wasn't room for territories. They got along fine. Over the years, we moved some out. Some had passed on. We got to the point where there were not enough gators to keep them out of that territorial imperative. And so they were starting to bite at each other. So we decided that was the wrong way to keep gators, and we didn't want to go back to 15 or 20 gators. So we redid the exhibit, dredged it out, improved it, and now we're down to 3 gators, 1 big male and 2 females, so they can really all set up shop and live the kind of life they'd live out in the wild. And they've rewarded us. They're like the most photogenic gators. They're sunny all the time. I mean, it's not 15 or 20 gators, but we'd rather have 3 happy. They're big. They're 11-foot gators. We'd rather have 3 really happy gators than 15 or 20 gators who are just constantly crowded in and not doing what they were supposed to do in the wild.
Does it amaze you that people who live in Florida and could basically just maybe drive less than 10 miles, it could easily see gators and they come to the zoo?
It goes back to that connection to nature. When I was at the zoo in Chicago, we started these basic nature programs for families. And we had a woman brave enough to tell me, she said, I had never taken my children either on turf or on hardtop. I had never gone in the woods. I don't even know how to do it. I'm scared to walk off the trail. And so you have people in Florida who are scared to walk off the trail. They see a gator and they freak out. And so the zoo is that scaffolding that gets them a little more comfortable.
Keith, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. My thanks to Keith Winsten for joining me in the studio. If you have questions about today's show, email me at irangel@floridatoday.com.
That's our show for this week. Be sure to join us again right here next week on WEFS and on floridatoday.com.